Okay, so you've done some background research on creation stories of a particular tradition, be that either Aboriginal or Jewish. You've gone out and you've had a conversation with a member of the community that you intend doing your multimodal presentation on. So what now? In this video clip, I want to talk to you about the next step in the research process, which is developing a script which you can then use to put towards the final production of the multimodal that you will submit. One of the things people often forget about multimodal presentations is that they require the same standard of presentation as a normal research assignment. So the script needs to be properly referenced, and there needs to be an annotated reference list in which you tell us where you went to find out the information that you did about the particular community that you investigated. So that's the first thing, and it's most important to developing a satisfactory script for this particular task. The second thing that I'd want to say is that in developing your multimodal presentation, never forget that you're a storyteller. You're telling a story to the audience about the impact of science, if any, on the way in which believers of either Judaism or Aboriginal spirituality understand their story of creation. And it seems to me that it's a story that comes in 4 parts. Any story begins with an introduction, and your story should be no different. And your introduction should have 3 key components to it. The first thing that you really need to say in your introduction is to make a statement about the importance of ultimate questions of origin. Why are these questions important? What is it that you've actually been looking at? The second thing which flows from that is what a researcher by the name of David Silverman calls the natural history of your research. So what did you do? So outline the steps that you took. So initially you undertook a document search, you then came up with a list of questions that you could ask a member of the community to which you were researching, and you spoke to someone. So that's the natural history of your research. The third and final thing that should be in your introduction is a clear statement of hypothesis. What is it that you want to say about the connection between the impact of science and the way in which members of a particular community have come to understand their stories of creation? So that's your hypothesis. It's the third part of the introduction, and it's most important. Once you've completed your introduction, you then need to move to the second part of your presentation. And in the second part of the presentation, you need to talk about the background of the people that you have researched. And by that I mean the community or the tradition. So you need to give us some information on either Aboriginal Australia or Jewish people in terms of what's their history and how did their stories of creation evolve? How did they come to be the way that we know them today? In this part of the presentation, you should also give us some background information on the person that you actually spoke to. Who was the person? How are they connected to the community to which they belong? That's a very, very important part of the second part of the presentation, and it needs to be there. You also, as part of this part of your presentation, need to give us a brief recount of the story of creation that you're going to be talking about. Now, you don't need to tell us the whole story, word by word, but in 30 seconds to 1 minute, you need to bring the audience into the picture about the story that you are actually talking about in your presentation. So that's the second part of the multimodal that you're going to put together. The third part of the multimodal is the actual ethnographic component of the study. And in this, you draw upon the field notes that you have made to report on how the person you spoke to understands their creation story and the impact, if any, that science has had on the way in which that person understands that story. Now remember, it's a multimodal presentation based on an ethnographic investigation. So it needs to be very, very clear that you have actually gone out and spoken to either someone or some people about how they understand their story of creation and what impact science has had on their understanding of it. So that's the third part of your presentation. The fourth part of your presentation is really your conclusion. And in your conclusion, you really need to do 2 things. The first thing that you need to do in your conclusion is to talk about what ongoing significance these stories of creation have for believers of a particular tradition today. Are they as important as they were 100 years ago or 1,000 years ago? Has the understanding of that story changed? And then the second and the final part of the presentation, which will finish the entire production, is to comment on the challenges as you see them that science poses for the ongoing telling of that story within a tradition. So what do you find? If you were to talk to young members of the tradition, are they as committed to those stories as people who might be elders in that particular community? So they're the 4 parts of the presentation that you need to put together. And as I've said, the multimodal presentation that you put together needs to be based on a sound and solid script. So the next step of your research process really is to go and develop that script and check it with your teacher.